When you lose your job, the first thing is, I think for a lot of people, is to scramble to find another one. They start reaching out immediately, calling all their contacts, calling headhunters, trying to get another job right away. And I think sometimes you need to maybe take a beat and realize that you've got a great background, you're a very skilled individual, you'll find something in society that you have value to society. So just take the stress off a little bit.
Our guest today makes a lot of content, especially during the last year. And as I watched it back to sort of get ready for this episode, I started to realize that there's a lot that's already been said about his actual field. I'm sure that it'll come up today, also content related. But the other thing that came through to me really clearly was how interesting a period it has been for our guest in terms of starting at a new place and being in a new job. And so I thought that we might talk to him about some of the special challenges and opportunities that presents. So our guest today is Michael Smith, who is the CMO of National Public Radio, or NPR, now for, I think, about 9 months. So welcome, Michael.
Oh, thank you. It's great to be here. We were talking about change and transition, and I think that, one of the things that's unique about the media industry, and I think most media careers, is that there really is no plan. I think most people will tell you, if you have a plan, it's going to blow up probably in the first 6 months of your career. I think all of us share a desire to work in media, but I tell young people all the time that how it's going to play out is really hard to see. All you can really do is just focus on the bigger picture of, what role do you want to play within the industry? Do you want to be involved in the storytelling itself, or getting people to the stories, maybe marketing, or maybe more about the monetization of the stories, would be sales, distribution. And then you just kind of see how it goes. It's such a dynamic industry. You just never know where you end up.
Yeah, that's a great envelope to think of it in this conversation. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit more about that journey for you. I also often think of particularly young people in my field out there watching this show and trying to find that, at least the beginnings of that path. And maybe they know what their interests are, what they're hot on, and they're thinking about where they're going to go. But I think it can be helpful to sometimes hear a little bit more about the path that someone like yourself has charted to get to where you are today. So first of all, what does the CMO of NPR do?
Well, I think the CMO of NPR, and I think any good CMO of most companies, should be the person who's really focused on audience development and audience growth and audience engagement for whatever your brand is. So for NPR, it's really interesting because it's a relatively new position. I'm only the third CMO the company's had in its history. I think the first one started maybe 4 or 5 years ago. And NPR has really been focused on its mission since launching almost 50 years ago, which is to create a more informed public and to really fill those niches that commercial media doesn't fill, in terms of making people more informed with trusted, fact-based information, just getting a better cultural sense of what's happening in America. And the belief is that the more informed and more culturally aware people are, the better citizens they'll be, and the better democracy, better country we'll have. But that mission has been I think very well realized by the creative people at NPR who've been telling the stories, the journalists and storytellers. But they've had their head to the ground, just focusing on that so hard, without maybe a lot of focus on how do you grow the reach and how do you grow the appeal of what we do. A lot of it's been organic and word of mouth, and frankly through cross promotion. We started with one show called All Things Considered back in 1971, and then a few years later we launched another radio show called Morning Edition, and the promotion was promoting within All Things Considered that, hey, there's a radio show in the morning now. And little by little we built everything on top of the things we had before, but we never really looked at national marketing, and off-platform marketing as a strategy until recently. And I think actually, for me, it's really exciting because it's a great chance to apply kind of more, for-profit world strategies to a really special, mission-driven, I think, national treasure.
Yeah, now it's so much more than what we classically consider radio, although I love the radio sensibility of a lot of podcasts and shows like that. But now, there's such a rich array of NPR digital content that's accessible through a number of different places. Maybe tell us a little more about that.
Yeah, the mission is, as I was saying, is to create content that will really help people think more critically about their world, to be more informed about their world. And when the Corporation for Public Broadcasting was set up after the Public TV Act of 1967, which came out of the Great Society programs of President Johnson, there were two organizations that were formed at that point. One was television, which is people know as PBS, and then one was in radio, which is NPR. And those were the mediums that we had to create this kind of content. But as 50 years have gone by, the ways people consume content and the platforms and mediums have really multiplied, and I think that's impacted NPR. And we look at it. We look at ourselves less as a radio company and more as a media company, still pursuing the same mission. But is that only through linear radio shows? No. Now it's through on-demand audio content, also known as podcasts, which have been really our fastest growing audiences over the last 5 or 6 years. And then now through npr.org, which is our popular website. We have an app called NPR One, which we have digital content, both text and audio in it. That's really popular in it. So our digital audiences actually are our fastest growing audiences, and we're seeing great growth on platforms. We have a very popular YouTube channel. People have probably heard of the Tiny Desk concert series. We have an Instagram page that's grown to almost 4 million users in the last couple of years. We have a big presence on Facebook. So we look at it as it's still the same mission of being that resource for trusted, credible content about your world. But now we can touch people through so many different places.
One of the things that strikes me when you run all of that stuff down is how swiftly you've become an expert. Even though I know you may not necessarily call yourself that, because you strike me as a relatively humble person. So, but to me, it's just amazing to hear you kind of riff on the history of NPR and how it got to where it is today. So how did you just do that? Like, do you, when you began to consider making a move to NPR, how did you prepare from just a understanding and information standpoint?
It goes back to why I love marketing and branding, because when I was a kid, I would kind of be the kind of kid that would go to the store and always wonder, why is this product being marketed this way? Or I didn't even know what that was the term, but it was like, why do they have 3 versions of Kellogg's cornflakes, and why is that one at the end? Why is that one at the end of the aisle? And why do they all have chewing gum by the checkout counter and not over here? And just always the why part was always fascinating to me. So any organization I work with, I think it all starts with kind of understanding, why does the organization exist? What's its reason for being? What's its essence? And kind of understanding you can help you kind of frame what everybody within the organization needs to be doing, where it needs to go. So before I started at NPR, I spent a lot of time doing that sort of, cultural anthropology about NPR itself. And the great thing about it, there's a lot of scholarship on this. A lot of people have written grad school theses on the history of public media and the role of public media. And so just did a lot of reading, and actually reached out in my early days at NPR to some of the actual founders going back to 1971, who wrote the original mission statement for NPR, and just to get a sense of why is it here, and what was the original intent, and that really helped focus my thinking about how to how to take the brand to where it needs to go. The immediate thought would have been, it's a media brand. Okay, just apply what you learned, I worked at Food Network and HGTV and a lot of, other traditional cable networks, Disney Channel. Just apply those lessons to this brand. But when you really dig into the purpose of NPR, then the nuances became really evident to me that we're not the New York Times, we're not the FT, we're not the Atlantic. We really are more like, I use the analogy, like we're like the Smithsonian or like a public library. We're really a resource, a free resource for really trusted, deep, rich information. If you think about it, if you want really trusted, non-biased, inquisitive reporting and storytelling for free in America, that's hard to find. You've got to have a New York Times subscription, which is $15 a month. You've got to have a FT subscription, or so it's a really special resource that we're making available, I think, to our country. And so it's a different way of managing a brand than you would say if you were at Vox Media or something like that.
But would you say, thinking of it from a process standpoint, I'm curious, do you remember it sounds like it's partly a personality thing, understanding the why, and I love that, wondering why. I do think that actually wondering why you found your way into it just now, talking about kind of marketing and where things live and why they live there. And I do think they're related, and it is a subtle but really important part of marketing. So maybe it's a personality issue that Michael Smith just does this everywhere he goes. But do you remember specifically if you took a similar approach as you moved into that pipeline of Food Network and Cooking Channel, and then, being a general manager for Scripps Networks? Each time, were you doing research and reading and sort of preparing to be an expert for that next thing that you had to do?
I think it depends on the context of why you're making the move. You're talking about, transitions in your career. And I think that there are a couple of meta forces that influence people's transitions. I think one of them is more, where you are in your sort of life stage of what you want from your career. I had a really great mentor named Judy Gerard, who used to be president of Food Network years ago. And she told me that she saw her career in 3 stages. Sort of the first stage was where you're taking more from the industry than you're giving. That's when you're kind of in your 20s, you're being mentored, you're learning a lot. You don't really have a lot to contribute yet, but that's sort of you're a sponge. Then there's that second phase of your career where you're really, really, rocking. I mean, you've got great knowledge. You're now working on some really important projects, and you're giving back as much as you're, being paid and rewarded. And then there's that third stage, which is, she said, was the stage where you give more than you take. That's really where you start being the mentor. You start doing things that maybe have more of a pro-social and leave a longer lasting legacy than yourself. And so that really stuck with me. That I think that for all of us, there's sort of first, second, and third acts in our lives. And then there's the other metaphors, which is just the realities of the dynamics of the business. Sometimes you have a job, then the company merges, or it's bought, or up and down. Mm-hmm. There's a recession. Now you're looking for a job, and or you hate your boss, or it's a lot of things things that you can't control. And so it's a combination of when those things happen, and you're in the position to need a new job or need to find a new job, and then where are you in your sort of personal journey. So for me, to answer your specific question, it's been different depending on what stage I was at. Coming to NPR, it was a result of the Scripps company had been bought by Discovery, in a major merger a few years ago, probably 3 years now, 2 years now. And that led to, a lot of executive departures. I mean, a lot of jobs, my job was eliminated. That puts you in a new place to kind of think about, well, what do I want to do next? The immediate thought is, I want to do what I was currently doing, just in another place. But I think that the great thing was I had some time to kind of think about that, and not just sort of knee-jerk say, okay, I'm sort of a senior executive at a cable channel. Let me find another one. I need to step back and say, well, wait a minute. You're in your 50s now. You've been in the business, almost 30 years. What role do you want to play? And the idea of making an impact, a bigger impact, about 2 things that I've always been really passionate about was really exciting. And those 2 things are: the first thing is this idea of the changing ways people consume content. It's gone from linear radio and linear television to cable. To digital radio, now to streaming. It's always fascinated me how the mediums have changed, and the need to sort of be agile and reinvent what we do, which is basically storytelling, but in new mediums. That's always been fascinating. And then the second piece, probably the most important piece to me, is this idea of the changing nature of America and who's in America. When I was in elementary school in the late 60s, early 70s, 82% of Americans were white. I was a Jamaican immigrant kid, seen as a black kid. And I think the American population back then was maybe 9 or 10% black, maybe. I think we were maybe 5 or 6% Latino, a couple of percent Asian. Now this year, for the first time in history, the majority of people in the United States under the age of 18 are non-white. So we've had a really epic change in the demographics in the United States, and it's sort of it's pointed out some tensions and problems as we've seen with the racial reckoning that we've had in 2020. But that was something I really wanted to lean into, and so NPR was a perfect place because it's going through this digital reinvention, as a radio company to a on-demand media company, and it needs deep thinking to figure out how to make that transition. And then secondly, NPR is it's in our charter to be representative of diverse voices, to be at the cutting edge of the the most important issues to the culture, and diversity, equity, inclusion is that issue. And so both internally and in our content, it's our top priority. So it kind of was the magical opportunity for me, given where I was in my own personal journey.
It definitely sounds like a dream job for you. So I'm really happy for that. And I've noticed it actually. I've listened to some of the other podcasts that I definitely would recommend that people listen to, like Full Disclosure, Robin Farzad's interview with you, and E.B. Moss did an interview on the customer, a Beat TV thing recently. And you go into, I think, in great depth, the very innovative approach that you're taking right now at NPR with your teammates to reinventing how we tell stories and to responding to all the many different people that listen to stories and how they listen to them. So I've been thinking about how much it reflects kind of some instincts that I think are personal instincts of yours. And another one that sang out to me as part of the process as I started listening to all this material and content that you've made is, over the last 9 months, COVID isolation has driven you into, in a great way, constant talking with people. And I wanted to dig into that a little bit about how you have gone about moving into this new role and figuring out who you want to talk to, how you want to value their opinion, and where it takes you, Michael Smith, next.
It's interesting how it's changed as the pandemic has prolonged. I think in the beginning, I saw it as a huge, actually an opportunity, because I'd been working, I left my last job at the end of 2018, and I'd been consulting at a couple of different companies. And so kind of working from home for over a year myself. So it wasn't that big of a change for me. And it was actually an advantage because it gave me a chance to be able to really dive into the organization and do a call with somebody at the LA bureau or somebody in the New York office or the Washington office and just really get into the nuts and bolts of what was going on at NPR. But as the summer wore on and now we're into the winter, it's starting to feel now like, okay, I know everybody now. I kind of know what's going on, but it'd be so great to be in person with everybody to get that sort of informal, sort of unplanned, spontaneous thing that you get when you work with people that you know well, and so that's the part that I miss.
Yeah, it reminds me too that as you talked about your mentor sharing those 3 phases of career, as you're entering that phase of giving as much or maybe even more than you're getting. By the way, do you see yourself in that phase, or are you still in the rock and rolling middle phase?
Yeah, I see it. Yeah, I do. I think, anybody who works in nonprofit, I think we all have to be frank. What people get paid working at NPRs or PBSs or, nonprofit organizations compared to what people get paid, in for-profit media, is different. So now I joke with people. I tell people, I made, maybe 2 or 3 times as much money figuring out, how to shoot onions at Food Network than I do try to tell people about, how to stay alive from COVID, which says something about, the values in our society. But it's so much more rewarding doing this.
Yeah. So I was thinking about how arguably nowadays we think about management also and being in a relatively senior role and having potentially reports as being a service, helping to grow the people that are in your organization with you into the careers that they're going to follow. Um, are you to what extent have you been trying to do that remotely? Do you have reports and have you had to step into managing people? And do you have a relatively formal person that you report to, who which is the an interesting, I think place to be at a variety of different points in your career where you've got the people that you're trying to manage and grow and serve, and then the person who hired you, who has a set of objectives for you.
Yeah, I report to the CEO of president and CEO of NPR, and then I have currently eight different direct reports. So the CMO job is a little bit unusual in that it's not just the marketing. I oversee the communications and our audience insights and research, our business development team, our consumer products team. So there's a kind of a wide range of things, our strategy team. But the thing that I've been trying to be very deliberate about is having regularly scheduled and very structured meetings with my reports, and then also with all the reports together in a sort of group session so that we can sort of share and workshop ideas as well. The nice thing, like I said about the remote working, is that it is easy though to keep a schedule. It's easy to say, okay, it's almost like especially we work in radio. That's one thing I've noticed at NPR. People are really good about starting meetings on time, booking them for a specific time, whether it's half hour or 1 hour. In fact, I've never worked at a place where people will say they'll refer to the clock in the meeting. They'll say, "Well, we've got 3 minutes left on the clock, so in the last 2 minute segment, let's talk." I think it's that radio mentality. When I worked, in other organizations, it was more like you started the meeting, at 2 o'clock, and you just kind of met until you had, until it went, and then some people might leave the room or whatever. But we are so on the dot, and especially with when you're on Zoom, the clock is right in front of you. so anyway, I guess is what I'm saying. In a long way is that meeting of cadence and efficiency has really been heightened and improved, I think, by COVID, and it's helped me really, I think, be effective from that side. The part I missed though is just, it's I used to have lunch and have drinks with my with my team.
Mm-hmm.
Can't do that anymore. So.
Yeah, I mean, it must be really challenging to get to know people purely through video meetings. At the depth that you want to know them in order to help them down the road that they want to be on.
Yeah. You almost have to force yourself to make small talk in the beginning and just just ask people, how was your weekend? How are your kids? Which is interesting in that I think because we use Zoom and these tools so much for business, it's not our instinct to have those kinds of conversations when you're sitting in a conference room or in your office and you've got, a cup of coffee and somebody strolls in a couple minutes late and you're waiting. It seems more natural that people talk about the football game they saw last night or, this kind of thing. But there's a formality, I think, that we have in video meeting that loses something.
And in the other direction, how have you managed, or were you given a really clear set of kind of KPIs by the president and CEO? Like, how do you think about how to satisfy the objectives of the organization for you, and make sure that you are supporting the person who manages you in the way that they want?
Yeah, I think the key thing we did at the beginning is the CEO and I had serious talks about the strategic direction for NPR and really boiling that down into a handful of core priorities and really focusing what we're trying to do. Because one of the problems I think with NPR or challenges we've had is that there's and I think a lot of nonprofits, because you're doing so much great work that almost everything becomes a priority, because they're all great things. They're all beneficial to people, and they're all helping serve the public. But we needed to really focus on a handful of things that should be the core and key priorities. And we identified, a couple of areas that we really needed to focus on. And the first one was diversifying our audience. We really realized that, if our mission is to create a more informed public, it's like sowing seeds of knowledge throughout the entire public, and we have been missing a lot of the fields. Our audience is only 25% diverse in America, like it's 40% diverse overall, and now almost 50% among younger people. So there's a big disconnect there. And so if you're a food bank and you're only feeding two parts of the town, your short-term priority is how do we get better at the parts that we're not feeding. So that was priority number one, was diversity. And then the second priority is the transition to digital, the fact that the way people consume, is moving from linear to on demand, and we need to really frame ourselves not as a radio show company, which will always, I think, be a big part of what we do. Radios, people aren't going to stop driving their cars and not stop listening to the radio, but they're also increasingly, consuming media and news and information on smartphones and mobile devices, and so. How do we transition our model into that world? And it's easy and hard. I mean, our traditional model has been that we make great information and deliver it through radio stations, and then we fund it through three ways: through either you as a member donating to your station, so direct support from listeners, and then two, through philanthropy, whether it's foundations or major donors, and then three, through sponsorships, through messages you hear, this program sponsored by so and so. Well, we had that working really well for a radio-based business, but how do you do that if you're delivering content, say primarily through Instagram, or through TikTok? How do you allow people to donate, I guess, to a TikTok video? How do you sell sponsorship in a TikTok video? How do you get philanthropists to understand even what TikTok is? So that's our big challenge, is that we know in the future we'll be doing the same work, but we'll be doing it on all these new platforms. And so how do we bring our revenue model into the 21st century?
Yeah. Something that really sparked for me there is, how much do you think it's important for your team to kind of walk the walk of new media and new audiences? And what I mean by that is I am always cognizant. Eric Eisenberg, who runs Eisenberg, where Listen In comes out of, he won't even, and hasn't for many years now, look at something that my team and I design in my role as a creative director off of the phone. Like, he wants to look at it on the phone first, because he's like, that's where our audience are principally ingesting the media. So I don't want to work backwards towards the phone from looking at a layout, I'm getting very nuts and bolts here, but a layout, for a browser. And so it puts employees in various roles in an interesting position, because I definitely have peers who are, say, my age, which is the older part of our staff now, who are just like, you know what? I'm never going to look at TikTok. I'm not going to, I'm just going to make TV commercials. I'm not going to worry about social media. And so, in my world, I'm always trying to figure out, I'm at the other end of the spectrum where I also have a young daughter, or two young daughters. So it's easy for me to do, but I sort of try to dive into and tackle each form of new media, each new platform. And I wonder, as a leader, what is your point of view on that for the people with whom you work?
Yeah, I find it really interesting that that there's this perception that older people are less savvy with technology, or less able to adopt new technologies. I don't know if it's become just this sort of meme of the 21st century, but if you think historically, most of the great inventions, technological innovations that happened in the 19th century and 17th century, whether from Galileo to Maxwell's, discovering electricity, to Niels Bohr and the atom. I mean, these were older people that were really smart people. So I've always been fascinated with this idea that getting older makes you less technologically savvy. I think I have all, I guess all the latest stuff, but that's the way I've always been. When I was a little kid, I mean, I had I had a record player, but then I bought a Walkman, then I bought an iPod, and now I've got earbuds. And I mean, it's a way of thinking that you always want to be doing things in a new and more, a better way. It's the belief in continuous improvement and not to be afraid of that. So I almost hate the term digital or technology or that kind of thing. To me, it just feels like it's just the water we swim in. I mean, it's just the world technology. The two constants in media have always been the change in the platforms that you make the media on, and then the change in the audiences, as culture changes. But the basic, game, or but the basic mechanism of how media works has not changed, I think, for centuries, for millennia. It's basically you tell a story and then you monetize it through a couple of different ways. You either get people to pay you to see it, or other people will pay you for access to the audience that you've aggregated to see it, which is called advertising. And then the other piece of it is the distribution, where you put it. I mean, if you go back to the Greek theater in 300, 400 BC, you had a stage, which is your distribution platform. You had a show, which is the play, whether it's the story of Oedipus. And then you had monetization. They charged some ticket prices. And then you had people in the theater that probably had little posters hung up in the back. Today it's called a playbill, that were marketing some things to the audience that was sitting there. So you fast forward, 2,500 years, and what's TikTok? It's a platform. There's a show. There's a way to monetize it, and and then there's at some point maybe there'll be some direct advertising in the content. So I think if you see yourself as just part of that business, it's just natural that all the other that the sort of tools will evolve around you.
Yeah. And then with regard to the evolving audience, I was curious if you think that anything that we've talked about today is particularly affected the space of making your move from one place where you work to another by being a woman or being non-binary or being a person of Jamaican heritage. Are there special challenges that you've either encountered personally, or just special thoughts that any one of us could have as allies to something that every human does, which is move into a new role, to make that to balance out possible biases, what do we call them? Unconscious biases and things like that.
I think, it's just simple empathy. I think it's, if you think back to when you were a kid and if you had to go to a new school and how you felt that first day when you walked into the lunchroom and you didn't know any of the other kids and you had to find a table to sit at. And there probably was that one kid maybe at that table that kind of smiled at you, that maybe was in a class a couple of hours before, that you recognized and said, hey, come over here and sit and meet my friends. And you remember how welcoming and special that moment was, where you felt like, okay, I'm comfortable and I'm not nervous. I can sit down and be part of this lunchroom. And I think it's just putting yourself then in the shoes of people who are in the classically called minorities, who have who that's how we often feel when we walk into situations. And so you say to yourself, there's a point of connection that you can relate to that, and then be that kid in the lunchroom who says, hey, come sit over here. I think it's as simple as that.
Those are great reminders. Hey, I wanted to kind of wrap up by asking how much of this kind of exploration that we've done on a personal level of making a move into a new role applies to NPR as an organization right now. I think you've actually done a nice job throughout this interview of weaving that in organically. But I'm kind of really, I feel like NPR is also at this special point, along with all media institutions, where there has been, kind of a sustained attack on their credibility and authenticity. And NPR sits in the midst of that kind of difficult challenge. And I wondered, what is your point of view on how you'll overcome that?
Yeah, I think we're in a good place in that there is an increased desire for people to find trusted information. We're in probably one of the highest, at least in my lifetime, periods of misinformation and polarized media. It's either extreme left or extreme right, or it's just misinformation, and people are hungry for something that they can feel that they can trust. They can trust in it, and we are constantly among the top 2 or 3 most trusted media brands, in the country, and we're one of the only ones that's free. A lot of the other ones are subscription based. So I think the desire for that kind of content and the fact that we're free is going to be mean that we're going to be never. Like we say it all the time. This year is a year that we've never been more needed, and we've seen it. Our digital traffic has more than doubled this year. Our podcast listings up, over 30%. Even with the decline in commuting, which really put a hit on our radio listening numbers, they bounced back. They're up to 40% from where they were in November. They were 40% from where they were during April. During the depths of the lockdown. So we feel like there's a great need and interest in what we do. We see even in our consumer products store where we sell T-shirts and hats and things like that. We had a record Black Friday, which indicated to me that people just love us and wanted to buy our T-shirts, which is great. So I think our biggest challenge is that we're still, the awareness of our brand is still relatively low compared to other news brands, and that's because we just haven't talked about who we are. And you combine those two facts that people are hungry for trusted information right now, and they've never heard of us. So the solution is market more and let people know that we're here. And so I think that it's all upside for us.
Yeah. Again, your dream job. You're the one that gets to do that. So that's really exciting. Hey, do you have any final words for on the topic of making your move for folks that have been following that thread in our discussion? What do you think people should be thinking about as they land in a new organization as the economy bounces back and Joe Biden and Kamala Harris open up hundreds of thousands of millions of new jobs?
Yeah, I think, especially in the media industry, there's been a lot of consolidation, a ton of layoffs. And so I think a lot of people are going through this, it's almost like the stages of grief thing that, your first thing is sort of denial and shock and acceptance. But, when you lose your job, the first thing is, I think for a lot of people, is to scramble to find another one. They start reaching out immediately, calling all their contacts, calling headhunters, trying to get another job right away. And I think sometimes you need to maybe take a beat and realize that, you've got a great background, you're very skilled individual, you'll find something in society that you have value to society. So just take the stress off a little bit and give yourself time to actually say, where am I in my life? And before you just jump back into what you were doing before, is there something else I want to do? Is there something I've always wanted to do? Is there something that I see myself in a different way and how I want to contribute in the world? And take this opportunity, because it's always often hard to have those moments of clarity when you're working 60 hours a week, drilling away on whatever you were doing. And this maybe for me, it was actually the first time since I got out of out of maybe high school, or summer break in college in 30 years that I had time when I wasn't just working on one job to another job so cherish that moment, because you'll probably jump into something again, and then you'll be doing that for 10 years and never have a break. So cherish this moment.
Terrific advice, I think. Hey, what a pleasure. Thank you for making the time to chat with me. I've been eager to get a chance to talk with you for some time. So now getting some insight into the road that you're on. I hope maybe a year from now or something we come back together and see where you are then.
Yeah, it'd be great, Matt.
All right. Been a pleasure.
Okay, thank you.